Okay, so today's Torah study is dedicated to the memory of Ephraim Yachman, Hashem Inkom Damo, Zichrono Uvracha, who died this morning in Gaza. Who was a very, very close family friend of the Jacobsons. And I have actually been davening for him every day of the war, because when Elaine's son Dan was here, he asked me to daven for his son Yehuda and for his whole unit. So every day in my tefillot, I say for Yehuda ben Hadassah and for his whole unit. So it's a very devastating day for Am Yisrael, as we lost such a waste, such a tragedy. But we learned today in his memory. So I wanted to talk, this is a portion which is called Vayechi, and he lived. The portion that's called and he lived is, of course, about death. In this week's portion, we read about the death of Yaakov. It starts off by saying Jacob lived. Vayechi Yaakov. Jacob lived for 17 years in the land of Egypt. But right away, Rashi tells us that this portion is different than all the other portions in the Torah, because all the other portions, there's a space between the end of the previous portion and the start of this portion, a space of at least 6 letters. But this portion, there's no space at all. And one of the reasons is, Rashi says in the first Rashi on the portion, because our eyes were closed in tears because Jacob dies in this portion. But in that context, we have to go to one of the most often quoted Rashis in our portion, which is about the death of Jacob. The verse states in chapter 49, verse 23, Vayechal Yaakov Litzavot es banav, Jacob ceased or finished commanding his children, his sons, Vaye'asof raglav el hamitah, and his feet were gathered to his bed. Vayigva, Vayeyasef el amav. Vayigva means he expired, and he was gathered to his people. Rashi right away notices, it's not just Rashi, it's the Talmud, as we'll see in a moment. Mitalo nemrabo, Rashi says. It doesn't say anything about death. It just says that he expired, but it never says he died. And there our rabbis say, Yaakov Avinu lo met. Jacob, our forefather, never died. That's what the Rashi on the Torah says, that Jacob never died. Now, I know, before we get to the questions about this, let me read the source for Rashi. And I just want to remind us all, we're studying the Torah in memory of a young boy, or a young man, named Ephraim Jackman Zichrono Uvracha, who died today in service of Am Yisrael. The word Jack is the name Jacob. He was the man of Jacob. So what does it mean? So the Rashi source is the Gemara Tanit 5b. The Gemara in Tanit 5b tells us the following: Rav Nachman ve Rabbi Yitzchak Avayasvi Bisudasa. So Rav Nachman and Rabbi Yitzchak were sitting and eating a meal. Amrle Rav Nachman Rav Yitzchak. So Rav Nachman says to Rav Yitzchak, Lema mar milsa. Would you teach us something? Amrle Hachi Amar Rabbi Yochanan. He said, no, I will not teach you something. He said, this is what Rabbi Yochanan taught. Ein mesichen besuda. We do not talk while we eat. Ein mesichen besuda. We don't talk while we eat because it could be dangerous. Shema yatim kanal veshet, because maybe the trachea will come before the esophagus and it could be extremely dangerous. V'yavo sakana, and it'll become dangerous. So he said, I'm not going to say anything. But basar disa'od, after they finished the meal, Amar, he said to him, Hachi Amar Rabbi Yochanan. This is what Rabbi Yochanan taught. Yaakov Avinu lo mate. Yaakov Avinu, Jacob, our forefather, did not die. And Rashi says, right there on the side, Chai hu le'olam. He's living forever. So the Gemara asks that Reb. So Rav Nachman asks, V'chi b'chti saftu saftanya v'chantu chantaya v'kavru kavraya. What do you mean he never died? The verse says they eulogized him. So was it for nothing that they eulogized him? It says vayechantu vayispedu. They eulogized him. They embalmed him, and they buried him. They buried him in the cave of Machpelah, Marat HaMachpelah. What do you mean he never died? He says, Mikra ani doresh. So Rabbi Yitzchak says, I'm expounding upon a verse. And here Rashi says, when it says that they embalmed him, it means they thought he died. They thought he was dead, but they were wrong. He says, I'm expounding upon a verse. What's the verse? The verse comes from Jeremiah, the prophet Jeremiah, when Hashem promised the Jewish people, V'ata, and you, Al Tira Avdi Yaakov Ne'um Hashem, do not be afraid, my servant Jacob, so says God. Al Techat Yisrael, do not be in fear, Israel. Ki hineni Moshiacha merachok, I will save you from far away. Med zaracha me'eretz shivyan, and your seed I will save from the land of their captivity. So this verse says the words both Jacob and also his seed. He says, I will save. Don't be afraid, Jacob. Don't be fearful, Israel. I will save you and your seed, your descendants. So the Gemara tells us, Makish hu zaro. Jacob, who is being saved, is compared to his seed, his descendants who are being saved. Ma zaro b'chayim, just like Jacob's descendants are still alive, because Hashem says specifically in the prophecy, God will gather them up from the land of their captivity. And who will God gather up? Do you think God is gathering up the dead? God obviously is gathering up the living. So therefore, because the living are the ones who are found in captivity and not the dead, Afhu b'chayim, so too Jacob himself is still alive. And Hashem Yisbarach will bring him from the exile to redeem him and his children. And just like we find by the Exodus from Egypt, it says Vayar Yisrael, means to say Yisrael Saba, that Hashem showed Jacob himself with his own eyes the redemption of his children. And that's what Rashi says here. God will bring Jacob from the place of exile, like we find, to see the redemption with his own eyes, like we find in Egypt. Rashi says, Vayar Yisrael. And we say, who is going to see it? The Yisrael Saba, the grandfather Jacob. And when it says that they embalmed him, udechanto chantia, when it says they embalmed him, nidmoahem shemes, they just appeared to them that he died, but he was still alive. And indeed, Tosfos points out, and this is what Rashi quotes, so too is implied where it states in the verse, Vayikva, he expired, and it does not and it does not say that he died. Okay, so this is the Talmudic text in Tanis 5b. And hold on, let me just pause for a second. So there are many, many, many explanations about this. How can we understand this extremely difficult passage? So Rashi, as we mentioned, seems to take it literally. Rashi says it means that he literally never died. But many commentaries write that's not the intent of this passage, to say he didn't literally die. That's not the intent. And so it doesn't mean that. It means the following. So I want to share the top 5 explanations here, and then some Hasidic explanations, including one from the Zeta, the Noam Elimelech, if we have time, and also from the Shem Shmuel. So we have a lot of beautiful explanations to share here. So the first explanation, and this is the explanation that's found in both Nachmanides and Rabbeinu Bechaya and Ramban, and also Rabbeinu Bechaya. These are medieval explanations. And this is a spiritual explanation. When it says Jacob did not die, it means that the soul of Jacob was hovering over his body at all times because of the strength of his holiness. Meaning, even after he died, his soul was hovering over his body. Because the rest of the tzaddikim, normally when a tzaddik dies, all other tzaddikim who are not on Jacob's level, their soul goes back to its source. They go back to heaven. And once they go up, they don't come back down ever to hover over his body. But Jacob, for his great holiness, and also the holiness of his body, because Jacob kept his body holy at all times, his soul went up and would also return. This is the uniqueness of Jacob. And this holiness is obviously incredibly rare, but it also applies. There's another example in the Talmud of somebody who it says he didn't die. So that was Rabbeinu HaKodesh, Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, the author of the Mishnah. The sages said that after his death, he used to return back to his home every Erev Shabbat. So there are some souls, just a few in every generation. That's what Ramban, Rabbeinu Bechaya say, where the soul returns to the hover over the body, even after they die. Most of the souls go up and stay up there, but some souls come back and hover. Don't ask me to explain the mechanics of this, because it's obviously a very mystical explanation, but it's very powerful spiritually, and I wanted to share that. So hold on one second. Okay, a second explanation is an explanation that comes from the Rashba, who was 14th century Spanish genius, giant. He says, what it means that Jacob did not die, just like his seed are alive, he is alive. It means that amongst his seed, he has nothing, no marks, no demerits amongst his seed. Because Abraham and Isaac, they both had seed, which was a black mark. Isaac had Esav, Abraham had Ishmael, and the rabbis do not look favorably upon either one of these people. So therefore, not all of their seed were able to be connected to life and to receive the Torah, which is Chaim. Torah is life. And one who clings to the Torah is clinging to life. But all of Jacob's seeds were clinging to Torah. So therefore, they're all clinging to life. And so therefore, since some of their seed went away from the path of the Torah, we couldn't say that about Jacob, about Isaac and Abraham. So the seed is testifying about the source. And so therefore, for example, he says, if some of their branches had perished, therefore, if you have a tree and the branches are dying, it's a sign that the tree is dying. But the seed of Jacob was all good. So that's testifying to the root, i.e., Jacob, to the source, that he was all life. And so therefore it states in the Talmud, just like his seed is alive, he is alive. That the seed testifies to the source and that there's no break from it. That's the second explanation, the explanation of Rashba. The third explanation, comes from the Chachmas Manoach. Hold on one second. This third explanation comes from the Chachmas Manoach. And here is what the Chachmas Manoach argues. The Chachmas Manoach says, it means that Jacob did not die in Egypt, but rather he died only in the land of Israel. Now, this is a little bit challenging explanation, because that's not what the Talmud says. The Talmud says, we had read the Talmud as saying that even Jeremiah was saying that you're going to grab up the seed of Jacob from around the world. And Jeremiah was well after the redemption from Egypt. But let's read what he says. It says, behold, v'nei anochi meis b'kivri asher karisi li. He said, behold, I will die in the grave that I dug for myself, or that I established through my purchase. Only there will I die. So basically, meaning to say, I'm only going to die when I get back to the land of Canaan and go into the tomb of the patriarchs. That's where I'll die, but I'm not going to die in Egypt. And what about the fact that it says that Jacob is compared to his seed? It means to say that just like Hashem kept his promise to Jacob that he will take him up from Egypt, so too Hashem will keep his promise to his seed to drag them up, or to bring them up from the land of their captivity. And so too, therefore, just like Jacob's seed will come up when they are alive, we learn from here that also Jacob was brought up from Egypt when he was alive. That's the explanation, that Jacob could not die in Egypt. His children needed him to be alive that whole time. He only died once he came to the land of Canaan. A fourth explanation, and this is from the Mira Dechaya, he says that Rabbi Yitzchak says, when Rabbi Yitzchak says that Jacob, our forefather, did not die, it means he did not die like other people who die, so to speak, that he's going to arise with them when it comes to the resurrection of the dead. But rather, it means he will be resurrected before them. And so therefore, it's like he didn't die, because he's going to be resurrected before everybody else who did die. A fifth explanation comes from the Meromei Sada. The Meromei Sada says that even after his death, why does it say Jacob did not die? Because even after his death, he was so sensitive, and he felt the manner in which honor was being done to him. And so he felt the honor that was being accorded him after his death. Because death is a term used for somebody who doesn't feel anything. Like we say, meaning to say, when you don't notice anything, it says that this person is not alive. But Jacob was so sensitive, even after his death, he felt the honor being accorded to him. And so that's what it means that it says Jacob does not die. And so another explanation, before we get to the Rebbes, before we get to the Hasidic masters, I saw another explanation from the Maharsha, the great 15th century German authority, and he writes as follows. He says, I don't understand Rassi's explanation that it just seemed to the Egyptians like he died, or the Jews, but really he didn't die. Because that doesn't seem to make sense. I mean, the whole point is that he was still alive. So he explains that when it says Jacob didn't die, it means his soul never died. Only his body died. And why is it that Jacob, of all the people, of all the tzaddikim, he's the one who we say his soul never died, just his body? So the Maharsha is of the position that it was true about everyone, but he only mentions it about Jacob because there's a verse, and the verse is saying, just like his seed are alive, also he's alive. And that is because, like we mentioned before, because all of his descendants were considered to be righteous. They're all of his descendants are part of Am Yisrael. So those are the classic explanations. But then now there are many more Hasidic masters' explanations. Before I go into them, I want to just pause and see if anybody has a question about this. I saw a lot of Hasidic masters with having a discussion of this, and I want to share the commentary of the Shem Mishmuel. And the Shem Mishmuel wrote this in the year 1905 or 1915. He wrote this in the year 1915. He wrote as follows. We need to understand, he says, Mikol Makom, Tzarich Lavin, that the same difficulty, the Talmud never addressed the basic question. Because he said, Jacob, our forefather, never died. So why did they eulogize him? Why did they embalm him? Why did they bury him? So he says, well, I have a verse. The verse says that Jacob's seed is going to be gathered up just like he's being gathered up. Okay, fine. So still, why did they bury him? If he was still alive, why did they bury him? Why did they embalm him? And furthermore, it says explicitly that he was indeed buried in the tomb of the patriarchs. People can go visit that today. Jacob was buried in the tomb of the patriarchs. So if he never died and he's still alive, why was he buried there? So it seems that there's a midrash that says, Jacob himself states, and I want to be buried with my forefathers. God says to him, I swear to you, you will lie down, because Jacob uses the word v'shachavti, which means almost like go to sleep. You'll go to sleep, but you will not die. And there's another version of this midrash which says Jacob will just be hidden. You will not die, but your body will be hidden away. And so now we get into a mystical explanation. This is the mystical explanation of the great mystic Rabbi Isaac Luria, the Arizal, writing in 16th century Tzfat. He says, the concept of death and burial, okay, this is mystical. So if you have a hard time relating to it, put it into a part of your brain, which is the mystical part, and maybe you'll relate better to it a few months or a few years from now. The Arizal says that, that the concept of death and burial is so that the bad elements, the bad parts that get drawn into the body of a person from sin, from the sin of Adam. When Adam sinned, the bad elements got attached to his body, and we want those elements to perish in the earth. And so therefore, when his body is resurrected, it will be resurrected without any of those bad elements attached to it. Meaning to say, when Adam sinned, bad elements became drawn into every single body. So in order for us to get rid of those bad elements that are part of the body needs to die, decompose, and then when the body gets resurrected, it'll be resurrected without those bad elements to it. There's one bone that will not decompose, that's the lose bone. And so presumably the bad elements from the sin of Adam did not attach to that bone. And indeed, Rashi writes on the verse in Psalm 78, verse 39, Hashem should remember that they are flesh, that the spirit goes and does not come back. Meaning to say that the evil inclination is hidden in their hearts. And that's the spirit that goes when somebody dies, but it will not return when they have the spirit of the world to come. In the world to come, there's no evil inclination. Means to say we have this evil inclination, which is basically the result of Adam's sin, and we need to get rid of that. And the way we get rid of that is when we die and our body is, so to speak, cleansed. That's what Rashi says. But, says the Shem Shmuel, the Hasidic master, the great mystic, he says, but Jacob, our forefather, was completely innocent without any sin whatsoever. He had no bad parts to him at all, no aspect. So therefore, since he has no aspect of sin at all, he has no relation to death and burial at all. And so therefore, the only reason why he was buried was to hide the body so that his soul can go back to the heights of heaven. But his body did not need to decompose. And so therefore, it's like a person takes off their garment and hides it for a moment when it's appropriate to wear it. But there was no death at all with Jacob, because death is an expression of breaking down. But Jacob was just lying down. There was no need to break down his body or his soul. And so, it's just like you put your garment in a box and wait for the proper time. And that's what it means Jacob did not die. It means to say Jacob's body did not need to decompose to get rid of the Yetzer Hara elements of it. And therefore, that's why he didn't ask the question, what about the fact that Jacob was buried in the Marat HaMachpelah? Because he wasn't buried, he was hidden away. So why did they eulogize him and why did they embalm him? Meaning to say, that was the question. That was the question that Rav Nachman asked. But we see from here that Shem Shmuel is suggesting a reason for death. And the reason is to purify us so that we could come back in a holy moment. But the rabbis say that the holiest Jews of all don't need purification. And these are the ones who die in service of Am Yisrael. As they die because they are Jewish. They die because they're part of Am Yisrael. So I just wanted to remind everybody that today we studied in memory of Ephraim Yachman, Zichrono Livracha, Hashem Yinkom Damo, and I'll be happy to take any questions at this time.